I want to talk about thank you cards. This past week, Daniel received a gift from one of our neighbors. It was kind of a surprise for us and for him. It was a gift to say thank you for walking their son, who is a few years younger than Daniel, to school every morning last year. Now, we didn't think that was really a big deal. They're friends. That's what friends do, right? But the parents appreciated it. It gave them a peace of mind to know that their son was, somebody older was watching out for their kid each morning. So when Daniel came home one day, all excited about his gift, Catherine said to him, "You should really write a thank you card." Have you ever told your kid to do that? I thought I knew how Daniel was going to respond. I thought his shoulders would slump and he'd get all sort of whiny and say, "Do I have to?" But that didn't happen. The gift was so great, he said, "Oh, for sure." It took a week, but we did finally write it. And that was really nice to hear from Daniel, because we want our kids to be thankful. We want to inculcate into our kids an attitude of gratitude. But it's hard to do sometimes. And to be honest, I'm not very good at saying thank you all the time, writing thank you cards. I have a little secret to tell you. I have a thank you card in my desk that I wrote a year and a half ago that I sent, but then I had the wrong address, so it got sent back to me. And I never got around to mailing it to the right one. And now I'm too embarrassed to send it. But I didn't throw it out. I kept it in my desk. Every time I see it, it reminds me, now's the time to say thank you. Don't delay. There is a great author. Her name's Diana Butler Bass. She's a favorite of mine. I highly recommend any of her books, but the one that I would recommend the most is her book, Grateful, from 2018. It's a delight to read. It's nice. It makes you feel good, and it inspires you to be more thankful. I just happened, when I read it, I just happened to be the moderator of the Presbytery of Brampton. And so that year of being moderator, it inspired me to begin all of our presbytery meetings with thanks. And so I would open each meeting by inviting the members of the presbytery to express things that they were thankful for in their lives and express that thanks to God. And people told me it really changed the tone of the meeting when we began the meeting with gratitude. Well, I receive weekly emails from Diana Butler Bass. I'm part of her email list. And she does these reflections every Sunday morning. I usually read them on my way walking to church. This morning, I didn't walk to church, so I didn't get around to reading it this morning. But last week's really resonated with me, and I thought it was timely for Thanksgiving. She wrote that after her book, Grateful, was released, she spent about 2 years speaking and preaching about gratitude. And she said that the most frequently asked question she would get at those Q&As that she would do was, "How do I get my grandchildren to write a thank you note?" I don't have any grandchildren, so I'm not sure I can relate, but I'm sure some of you can. And so she said at first, the way she would respond is she would offer tips on forming spiritual practices with kids. But that never really seemed to satisfy anybody who asked the question. So the next time that question was asked at one of her Q&A sessions, this nice grandmother, again, bemoaned that her grandchildren never said thank you for any of the gifts she sent them, and she was quite hurt by their lack of gratitude. And so just on a whim, Diana decided to do something different. She asked a follow-up question. If your grandchildren never sent you a thank you note, would you stop giving them gifts? Would you insist that they return the presents? The grandma laughed. "I'm tempted," she said. "But of course, I'd still send them gifts. and I certainly wouldn't take them back." So Diana replied, "You don't send gifts to get notes." "Why do you send gifts?" she asked. The grandma replied, "Because I love them. Thank you notes are nice, but gifts aren't contingent on them." Thank you notes are nice, but gifts aren't contingent on them. I like that line. And it reminded me of today's reading from Luke. I preached on this same text last year, and my sermon was called The Thankful Samaritan. And I focused solely on the Samaritan in the story, the one who came back to say thanks. This year, I like to put the spotlight on the other 9 who didn't come back. And so let's just recap the story to start. You got 10 lepers. They see Jesus coming, and they call out to him for healing. And Jesus doesn't just wave his hands magically and says, "You're healed." He just says to them, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And on the way, in that act of following Jesus' command, all 10 are healed. At this point in the story, we know nothing more about the 9. We're left only to speculate about what might have happened to them. The focus of the story shifts back to the Samaritan who came to say thank you to Jesus. And Jesus asks, "Where are the other 9? But the Samaritan doesn't even have an answer for Jesus, just gratitude. So Jesus tells the man to go on his way, remarking that it was the man's faith that made him well. So we are left to ask and wonder, what about those 9? How do you preach about 9 guys who you don't know anything about? Well, so you ask questions. At what point did they notice they were healed? Was it a little later? Maybe they were further away and they're like, I don't want to run a whole kilometer back to tell Jesus thank you. Did they continue on to the temple to show the priests? Why didn't they turn around to say thank you when they noticed? We get no indication that their lack of gratitude affected the gift that Jesus gave them. Jesus, in the story, doesn't take the gift back. He doesn't threaten those 9 or warn them about their ingratitude. He didn't send a disease to reinfect the ingrates. He didn't direct the temple authorities to arrest them and return them back to their leper colony. Whether they said thank you or not had nothing to do with the gift they received. And so we may not know very much about the 9, but what we don't know actually says a lot about God. I might even suggest that rather than the story being about the Samaritan, the one who said thank you, that this story is really focused on the generosity of God. The gift they received was free. No thank you note required. We have a name for that kind of gift in the church. Do you know what it is? Yeah, it's grace. Grace. A gift with no strings attached. A gift that comes from the very nature of God. A gift of love. God is the ever-gifting one. Extravagantly, endlessly, without condition or expectation of response, God gives good gifts generously. Do you like that alliteration? God gives good gifts generously. You only need to look out the window, even on a rainy day, to be reminded of the gifts God has given. All of creation is a gift. Every day we are surrounded by God's gifts. The gifts never stop. They're never taken back, not in any way contingent on the recipient. The gifts just are. Gifts are grace. But truthfully, we seldom notice the gifts. Only occasionally are we like the Samaritan and turn back, fall on our knees, and say thank you. Like it or not, we are a lot like the 9 who didn't come back rather than the one who did. God is the dependable, loving grandmother who never forgets a holiday or birthday, and we are her grandchildren who forget to send a note of thanks. And yet, the gifts keep arriving, which to me this week begged the question, if God's gifts are not contingent on thank you cards, is saying thank you really that important? All 10 were healed, weren't they? What lesson are the 9 who didn't come back? What lesson should we take from them? Well, yes, 10 were healed. But I would argue that something more beautiful happened with the one who gave thanks. Something that can be easily overlooked in this story because of how we often translate the original Greek of the text. I want to ask you, do you remember what Jesus said to the Samaritan? Your faith has made you well. And we read that and we think that Jesus is talking about the healing that this man received. And that could be a satisfactory understanding. But when we remember that all were healed, you have to question, even the ones who showed no faith or gratitude, they were made well, weren't they? But if we look again at the word that Jesus used there, the verb to be made well, we find that it means much more than just healing. The Greek word here is sozo, which isn't generally translated to heal. It can be translated to be saved, to be rescued, to be delivered, or to be made whole. And so I think what I'm trying to maybe say here is that yes, 10 men were healed that day, but only one was saved. Only one was made whole again. Because I think what the story is trying to get across to us is that gratitude and faith and our salvation are somehow connected together. Butler Bass, she writes, gratitude is an expression of faith. There's that link. Gratitude is an expression of faith. And gratitude can change everything, she writes. It transforms our ability to see the giftedness of our lives. It transforms us to stop taking the great generosity of God for granted. And it transforms us to freely respond to God with attentive trust or faith. She likens this salvation, this being made whole, to a circle of gifts and gratitude. And it's this circle where we find wholeness. God gives good gifts. We receive those gifts. We recognize those gifts are from God, and we respond with gratitude and trust. And the cycle continues as God continues to give. You don't ever have to say thank you to God. God's love never ceases. The gifts never end. And yet, it is good to notice how extraordinary it truly is, God's gracious love, this gifted life we live. And by trusting that, by being attentive to it, we can find salvation and wholeness Amen.